How do you get original ideas and story inspiration even when it seems like everything has already been done?
Oh, I love this question. So,
Welcome back to my interview. This is part two with M.E. Hansen. Woohoo!
How do you know that your story is being received and imagined the way you see it in your mind?
oh my goodness, how do I? Because see, for me, in the process of plotting things out, it's a movie in my head. I see the scenes as I'm plotting them out. And so, because I'm a plotter and I see those scenes in advance, I'm like, this is how I try to plot it out as much detail as possible. So then, when I'm finally popping it into the book, obviously I'll add more detail and more in depthness to it. But I kind of already envision it in my mind. And then I try to decide what camera angle, what am I going to zoom in on? And and then I focus on that for that scene, or I'll zoom out and describe, the setting or something. And so I know that sometimes in the beta reading process, one of my beta readers, she actually expressed one of my characters being very traumatized and that he wouldn't want to go back into the forest because something traumatic happened there. And I kind of panicked because I was like, do I want to stick to what I want or do I want to change this? And I started trying to envision, well, if I changed it, if I brought up this other character, how would the book look? How would that change it? And I tried to envision that and I would write that down and kind of replotted things and how that would affect the ending of the book. Because with the first character, it was more of it was still like exciting, but it was more middle grade kind of solution. It was just kind of quick and yay, everyone's happy. But with this second character that I chose to go with after all, it's a little more gritty, it's a little edgier, it's a little more emotional, and it fit the tone that I wanted to have after all with this particular book.
Maybe you get it from your beta readers too?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I definitely did with my beta readers. They'll suggest some things or they'll mention things that, didn't work for them. And I'll be like, oh, okay, I can see that. I can understand that. And then I can make that clearer and, you know, just help out with that, I guess. Yeah.
And I'm really glad you explained the beta reader process. That
Yeah.
was gold. And link below to that one because that's a must see. So
Yes.
I like how you really measured
Mhm.
it out, explained every
Oh,
step
yeah.
clearly. So
You.
I think that's a big help too, is
You.
talking to people, see how they saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah.
How do you get original ideas and story inspiration even when it seems like everything has already been done?
Oh, I love this question. So, I love Neil Gaiman, and I have to start with him because in his masterclass, he had said something along the lines of put too much of yourself in your works. And I took that to heart. And that's why I love, again, I love this particular book because I put too much of myself in this one. It's very relatable in that way because I was like, everyone can write about judgment and comparison, but what makes Margaret different, right? What is it about, I don't know, climbing a tree? We both can climb a tree, but I climb it differently than you do. How you may formulate climbing a branch may be completely different in how I, climb the branch or whatever it is. You may like the color purple and I enjoy the color gray. And it's these little elements that we have through our life experiences. It's the things of how we view the world, how we were raised, how, there are so many little factors that you can weave into an idea and and can make it your own. We all know the story of the three little pigs, but what if, but I love, first of all, I love with the three little pigs the perspective from the wolf, the big bad wolf, right? And my favorite is the one where he's like asking for a cup of sugar. And I love that. I was like, oh, it's the same story, but it's from his perspective. And whether he is guilty or not, it's like, I love that, right? And so everyone knows the story of the Little Red Riding Hood or the Three Little Pigs or whatever. But if we take a different angle, it makes it not really real original, but it definitely makes it unique and it makes it its own idea. you know? And I like using the Three Little Pigs as an example, because what if the one who built straw just had this vendetta against his older brother who was with bricks and he felt neglected or something, right? And so we get to watch his journey. And what if he doesn't get eaten? And what if he ends up being the hero in the end or whatever it is? And it's so fun that we get to explore these things. We have a lot of retellings of fairy tales or nursery rhymes because of this. And as far as original ideas go, it just depends on the depth and how much work you want to put into a certain idea. You know, like with The Thief's Betrayal, I like to tackle complex grief. That's a really heavy topic to cover, and how to put that into perspective, and how to put that in a way that a reader can read it and not feel like, oh, you have to, forgive people who hurt you, but yet you love and you miss or whatever it is. It's like I I just let the reader kind of decide how they want to think, and I present it with this thief. That's kind of the thing that's haunting him is, this father figure that he has, and the drive and the motive that he has to do what he does because of that one character. And we've all heard stories about those similar things, and we get to watch those protagonists respond and either come off victor or become evil. It's either way. But I feel like it's our own personal element that we can throw in that will make that story unique. Because we've all experienced a heartache, or we've all experienced the joy of eating a candy bar or whatever. And it's how we decide, through the details we decide to focus on, to the emotions we want to, connect it to even the metaphors that we want to use in describing a certain thing. I think that's what makes it unique and kind of original, I guess, in its own little way. So I love that question. That was so fun.
All right. Great answer. And next question.
Yeah.
What is the best way to make a character bad but still likable?
Oh my goodness. It depends on the tone. I'm going to go with tone first, because we have so many like morally gray characters these days that are doing bad things, but are just somehow managing for us to like want to root for them. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be angry at you, and yet you're trying to do something good. And I know with villains, I find with the villains, like the technical answer, I guess, the right answer would be, of course, as long as they are convicted, like their conviction, I guess, not convicted. I mean, they probably are convicted, but but I mean, like showcasing that what they think is right, and that's what makes them the villain. If they think it's right to, chop up all the flowers, right? Then that's it. That's what they think. And yet we're like, no, we love flowers. It's great. But to make them likable, if it is possible, I guess, would be to show a vulnerability. What is it about those flowers that makes them want to chop them up, right? Did the flowers represent a person in their life that, hurt their feelings? Did it represent someone who had passed? Sometimes people have reasons. Well, most of the time, if not all the time, people have reasons to do what they do. We don't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I am going to just chop off all my flowers and I don't care. It doesn't matter. They'll grow back, whatever, right? No, there's a reason usually, especially with villains, that have inspired them to do whatever it is that they're doing. So if you want to try to make them likable, I suppose, is give them a vulnerability. Show them as humans, like give them a human moment. And it can be a quiet moment when they're not destroying their henchmen or taking over a city or whatever it is that they do. you know Give them an object that may have some sort of sentimental value to it. Give them a person. Maybe there's a picture of a person or a person that's in their life that isn't quite coinciding with what they want. I don't know. There's a variety of things because humans are so complex. But definitely, I would suggest like showing us a vulnerability. And that can be a person, that can be a thing, that can be an experience. And maybe that can give them a little more sympathy.
Quick pause here. Most of you have a story in your heads that you've been trying to get on paper, trying to get written for years now. Enough waiting. Sign up for Book Bootcamp. The link is below.
It made me think of like sympathetic villains, where they're not all bad, because no one's all bad and no one's all good. We all have different, a different variety of good versus evil in us all. And usually villains get a bad rap because their choices really aren't ideal in making people prosper. And they usually take away agency or kind of override the laws of the land or whatever it may be. But I think if we give a little more sympathy to them, then it might make them a little more likable if you want to. I don't mind. I actually don't mind going back to the days where they are evil for the sake of evil. But society has grown in such a way that we need more emotional connection and relatability with our characters. And so to satisfy that, I think vulnerability and creating a sympathetic villain would be more helpful with that.
All right. Going along with characters.
Yes.
When it comes to naming fake imaginary towns, spells, other names, and etc., what is the best way to get inspiration or ideas?
Ooh, so what I like to do is I first pick a base language. So for me, my heritage is more Hispanic and Latina. I have, people from Greece and Brazil. So when I'm picking names for particular characters or places, I choose a little more of that Spanish sound to it. I have Junatri, that's a place in the Thief's Betrayal. But I also have a lot of European on my other side of my family. And so I tend to also capture more French sounding names. I have a villain, or at least a villain species, I guess, or a race, I guess a sorcerer race that I call the Magi. Now it's not Magi because that's not what they represent. It's Magi, which would be magic in French, from what I understand. And so that's little simple things. Just find a specific language that you would like to have your sounds, your names stem from, and then explore objects or descriptions in that language. If you have a country that's based on wheat, if they provide most wheat or bread or something, maybe you could look for a foreign language version of bread or wheat or whatever. And then that can be, the name. If the name doesn't sound exciting, add an apostrophe, break it up, add an apostrophe. If all else fails, add an apostrophe, because there was for one of the names in the book, in The Thief's Betrayal, I was looking at herbs and spices, because that's kind of where that's their big product, their cash cow, so to speak, is spices. And I was like, okay, well, I like coriander and I like cumin and I like oregano. And so I went online and I looked at the actual Latin version, or the original pronunciation or the history of oregano. And then I looked at the word, and it was obviously a really weird, unpronounceable word, but I cut it in half and I added an accent, an apostrophe. And then I had the name, and I was like, okay, it's still unpronounceable, but it's a name and it's fitting for fantasy, because that's the big trope, is unpronounceable names. And so that's what I did. So if there's certain things that are in correlation with your world building, then just first pick a specific sound. You may like Scandinavian sounding things. They're a little more glitteral, and a little more harsh. And if you are, if that's what your civilization is more into, is really harsh, then maybe Scandinavian or European, German, things like that might be a little more interesting to dive into and explore when it comes to naming and pronunciations and things like that. So that's what I like to do. And when it comes to just naming characters, sometimes I go down the alphabet. I'll be like, do I have a character with the name A? And I would list all the names that I have already. So it's a good thing to keep track of your character names, because sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I have a lot of Ashley. Well, what else can I do? Maybe Ashlyn. I could do Ashleen, you can play around with names that you already have. Sometimes you can pick people in your life, and if you're willing to name things after them without telling them, of course, then maybe you could do that. There's a country in the Thieves Betrayal, it's called Patry, and my dad's name is Patrick, and I just took the Rick off and I added an I after the Pat, and it's Patry, however you want to pronounce it. And so it's simple as that, and it really just, that kind of still fit with the whole kind of Spanish, sounding thing, is Patry, and I love it. And so accents, little, apostrophes, chopping things up, and playing around with language could be very inspirational in helping you with naming. And if all else fails, there's a lot of name generators online as well. But
I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, those are really good too. But yeah, that's what I got.
Okay. And I think this is the last question from them.
Uh-huh.
Book Bootcamp cadets.
Mm-hmm.
What keeps readers engaged through the whole book? I feel like my writing is boring and not engaging enough.
Oh my goodness. Well, the technical answer would be pacing, because you can engage with your scenes. If it's really a lot of exposition heavy, shorten that up. But the fun creative answer would actually be the showing and telling. I would think personally, I like the showing and telling approach to engagement or excitement. And I'm like, am I telling you how this scene is playing out, or am I showing you? And if by showing, that gives you an opportunity to play around with the senses and creating more of an immersive experience for your readers. If I just tell you that the sky is blue, well, that's great. We all know that. But if I showed you the puffy clouds that are going through it and the wind that's kind of pushing them across as we sit in a meadow of green not daffodils, green grass surrounded by daisies and daffodils, that creates more of an engaging, interesting experience. And so definitely I would feel, if you want to be more engaging, think where you can show us, which typically is emotional, and decide when you want to tell us something. If you want something to go fast, tell us about it. If you want something to slow down, show us. Show us how sad they are. Tell us how angry they are in a fight or something like that. But I don't know, it's more along the lines of just kind of zooming in. If you want to zoom in that little metaphoric camera, you want to zoom in, that is taking your time. That's showing us right here. This is where we're at. We're going to stay here for a little while. If I want to zoom out and say, well, the company traveled across the ocean in a boat and that was great. And now here we are on the shore. That was a fast journey right there. If it's important, obviously you want to take your time explaining and showing us why it's important. If it's significant, take your time and showing us that, sharing why it's important or significant. But if you really just have to get from point A to point B, just tell us that. It's okay. We do not need to see every single rock on that one path that they were taking out of town in order to get into the forest. It's okay to describe the forest and how spooky it is, if that's interesting and making us want to turn the page. But overall, I think showing and telling can help decide how fast or slow your writing can be, as well as how immersive and engaging it can be.
Well, this might be a weird question. Let me see if I can
Sure.
explain it well. So if we were to put the zoom in,
Yes.
the showing and telling on a scale,
Okay, yeah.
Let's see, this is mirrored. Beginning of the story to the end of the story.
But yeah.
How often do you zoom in and then show? Is there usually a pattern to that, or does it depend completely on the story?
That depends on the story. Again, we are so complex in how we share things and how we experience things. And so if you are really passionate about daisies, you just might want to focus on the daisies, and I could probably care less about it as an author, or not, well, as an author, but as a reader. But because you, the writer, have decided, I'm going to tell you all about daisies today and why they're significant, you can then decide, we're going to stay here for 2 pages and talk about daisies. And then the reader gets to decide, well, I'm going to put this book down because I don't care about daisies. Or it's like, all right, I'll play. Let's see how it goes. Or they can simply just be like, I'm going to turn the page. Is the next thing more exciting? Oh, now we're talking about daffodils. Okay. All right. That's fine. All right. And so I wish there was a set pattern. And if there was, I think stories would get really boring and we would start to notice the formula. And so I suggest not doing that. Don't make it formulaic, spice things up a little bit. You may want to focus on the dragon scales, but what about their personality? Let's dive in a little more deeper with what's relatable. And I feel like showing things that are more relatable to your readers can also be a gauging of when to do that. If your characters have gone through a really traumatic experience and you decide, I want to show you the consequences of that, that might be a little more relatable depending on who your audience is. And then you can take your time doing that and showing us, and however many pages or words you want to do that with. And then there may be times where in the next chapter, you're just like, well, we've already told you that or showed you that they're upset. So I'll just do like a sentence here that kind of reminds you, and then we'll move on, because that's not important. You always want to be moving your plot forward. And so you don't want to linger too long on one thing, but establishing an emotion or establishing something significant for them to remember or to think about can be really helpful. And then you can just kind of recall it later. And if you want to establish it again, just make sure it's not as long or, redundant, I guess. It's always good to refresh, but we don't need to hear the sob story all over again when we've already heard it in chapter 2. We can just kind of brush against it or kind of
refresh,
see.
but don't repeat.
Yeah.
There's so much to writing. That's crazy.
Oh my goodness, there is.
Trying to explain it. It's like,
Yeah. This is not an easy thing. A lot of people may think we sit down and just go like this the whole day, but we're really not. That's just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to writing than just hitting keys and putting words behind each other.
And it's so different with other, like playing sports. You always know what the objective is. The objective is always the same. The penalties are always the same. The rules are always the same. You might be playing with different people, but that's, marketing. You might have a different audience, but the steps you use are the same. So with writing, it's like, oh, do you want it to be a happy story or a sad story? Who's going to win? How does it go?
Exactly. And it's like, do you want it to start happy and end traumatically, or do you want to keep it happy? It's like there's so many possibilities with writing a story. And if you break it into parts, you can even rearrange those parts, and it just makes it entirely different, with those 3 little pigs,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask if you have any advice for this. These are some of the worries that my cadets have brought up.
Yes.
I'm going to read through them.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me just move this, scroll to the side. There we go. I tend to get worried sometimes because I think my stories are silly and inadequate compared to other authors. What if this is a total bust and someone can write this better than me and I should just leave it? Sometimes I feel that I get in my own way and I go through ups and downs too much to be writing consistently.
Yeah. So that reminds me a lot about imposter syndrome. And I'm going to say something very controversial because I can. I'm an indie author and I can do whatever I want. But I feel like imposter syndrome is learned. I think it's a learned ability. And I say this because when we reflect as we're starting out, we're so excited about writing a book, or maybe some of us are children when we started writing. I know I was a child author, a child writer. I didn't publish anything as a kid, but I was so excited just to write my story. And I got lost in it and I loved my characters. I didn't overthink anything. I didn't care if it was like following a formula, if it was even a 3-act play. I was just writing my book and I was loving it. And as I got older and I started to learn things, I started learning more about structure and metaphors and all the things that go into writing. I started becoming more aware of, oh, well, I shouldn't spend 3 pages explaining my magic after all. That's too much. That's going to bore the reader. And so then I became more conscious of that. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. And so, but then with imposter syndrome and the comparisons and the self-doubt that comes in, I feel like that's learned because we see this other author who is finding success, and because they wrote something awesome and they didn't spend forever writing exposition on magic. And then we start thinking, oh, well, maybe I need to do that too. Then if I want their success, I should do that. And that's the key, is we're comparing our experiences to their experiences. And that's not how we should do that. And so that second phrase about what if it's a total bust, that's self-doubt right there, just coming in because it's not going to be. It's not going to be a total bust. Trust me. Now, granted, this is coming from an author who only out of the 3 paperback ebook books, novellas that I've published, only one is actually paid for itself. And did that, do I look at that statistic and think, oh, well, I'm not successful commercially. I might as well just stop writing. And the answer is no. And I may never, ever be commercially successful, whatever I define that as. But does that then mean I just stop now and go, I don't know, start flipping burgers or something? I don't know. But it really comes down to, what do you want to do at the end of the day? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be a writer? And if the answer is yes, well, what does that mean? And and so I find that when we allow self-doubt and comparisons to kind of block us creatively, it just destroys the fun. It takes the fun out of it when we start worrying about what other people think, or we start thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't write this retelling of The Three Little Pigs because it's always been told before, right? But again, you have experiences that someone down the road may have experienced and needed someone to relate to them. What you put into your works can help somebody and may touch somebody in such a way that they're like, oh, I have struggled with complex grief. I may not be a thief, trying to better myself, but I do understand finding closure with that particular person who I loved, but didn't, maybe they neglected me or whatever, but finding that closure and realizing that's what I need to do to move on, that might be helpful. Now, I don't expect people to read that deep into my works, but I find that if it's a story that you are passionate about, try to put I wish we could do thought mufflers or something, because it's ignore those thoughts of doubt and just write that story. It's okay if it doesn't make sense in that first draft. It's not supposed to, but that's why you have stages and you have those beta readers. It's go through the process and take the time and the effort for people to see those things, because they can also give you the feedback. And if they're really good at being beta readers, they can give you some compliments as well as some critiques, and can still inspire and encourage you in the process of teaching you something as well. And so I really do. I feel like imposter syndrome, or the comparisons and that self-doubt, I feel like we learn that as we start to look outward. And I wish we all could just go back to our childhood, or that first exciting moment where you're like, I got an idea, right? And stay there the whole time, because sometimes ignorance is a bliss in this sense, because we are most creative when we're not thinking about what other people are saying or doing or whatever. It's like when we're on our own little island doing our own thing, sometimes that can be a great thing. And again, there's a time and a place, to take feedback and to take, thoughts and opinions of other people. But I wish that more authors could truly just kind of go into a soundproof room and just stay right there and just work, and linger with their characters and explore their worlds and do whatever it is that brings them joy, and write those things that bring them joy. And because I guarantee that there will be a reader out there who is like, yeah, I love cinnamon rolls just as much as Margaret does, and they bring me joy too. I love sugar. It's great, and then they can read that story and just be like, oh, yes, this one that I read first thing. Of course. Yes, this one. Cinnamon rolls. I love it. Anyhow, you'll have to read it. But that's what I try to say when it comes to these moments of feeling like we always get in our own way. And I say, don't do that. Don't get in your own way. Don't listen to those negative thoughts. Trust your gut. Trust that this is what you want. Of course, accept the consequences of whatever you choose to keep in your story as you go through the process. But at the end of the day, it's your book. It's your idea, and it's your thoughts and your passion. It's not the followers on Instagram. It's not even your significant other or your children or your family or your friends. It's your idea that you want to bring to life however you're able to. And yeah, I think it's fabricated, and we need to just stop giving it time, stop empowering those thoughts, and just focus on a positive narrative, have a little more trust, and write those stories. Someone will read them, and they'll need them, and they'll love it. So yeah.
That is beautiful inspiration. I think that's a great ending point for this interview. Thank you so much for coming. I learned a lot once again. All these
I hope I didn't write about too much.
That's the point of this, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Where can people find you and your books?
Still for now on Amazon.com. Just search M.E.Hansen. This one, M.E. Hansen. This is my name. And yeah, and I'm right there for now. And we'll be hopefully for a little more longer. I'm hoping to have a different place, but Amazon for sure, or on Instagram, which is author_M.E. Hansen. And that's where I'm there too. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful. Bye, writers. See you later.
Yeah.